Hey class, so I'm going to talk you through a TIQA paragraph, and actually the format that you'll notice on the in the Google Classroom, instead of just calling it a TIQA paragraph, I've generally called it a TIQATIQA paragraph, and that's because this format is repeatable. So you'll remember that TIQA, the acronym TIQA, stands for T, topic sentence, I, intro, Q, quote, and A, analysis. And remember we said that that Q doesn't always have to be a quote. It could be a paraphrase, it could be a piece of evidence, an anecdote, right? But that Q, that quote, paraphrase, evidence piece is your outside source, the source that's not just you talking, your support for your argument. So what you see on the screen here is a paragraph that I started with my first period class. So it is in the TIQA format. I'm gonna before we get to the paragraph, I'm gonna finish making this document into MLA style. So we'll start with my name, the class, and the professor's name or the teacher's name. So in your case, that's me again. And the date. So today is August 31st, 2022. And then on this next line, we center and we make a title. Let's come back to the title because we want our title to be meaningful. So let's write our paragraph first, and then we'll have a better sense of what title we should give it. Okay, so in this paragraph that I've already written with the first period class, we have our topic sentence. So our topic sentence is, in the Four Freedoms speech, President FDR indicates a belief that military power should be used in defense of prosperity. So that's what everything in this paragraph is going to be discussing, that FDR indicates military power being used in defense of prosperity. Then we have our intro to the quote. After listing the high ideals he believes all Americans should and do support, FDR states, that's our introduction, because we don't want the quote sitting there by itself with no words of our own to couch it in. Then we have our quote. Therefore, the immediate need is a swift increase in our armament production, and that's from paragraph 37. Remember, in MLA, we put the author's last name and the page number in our parentheses. Here we have the author's last name already in the paragraph. We have FDR there, so we don't need it in our parentheses. And in this case, we have our paragraphs numbered. So you always go with the smallest piece of the text that is numbered. So if there are numbers on the page for the paragraphs, you use the paragraph number, because what your goal is to help whoever is reading your text find that quote. And so if there's a line number, if there's a paragraph number, that's going to help them even more than a page number. So you go with the smallest available number. Don't number the paragraphs yourself and just count them and do it. But if the paragraphs have numbers in the text, you use them. Okay, and then we have our analysis of that quote. So what does that quote mean? How does it connect back to our topic sentence? By following his moral imperative with the military one, remember I just said after listing the high ideals, he says this. So I'm referring back to what I've said. Roosevelt betrays his belief that in the end, the U.S. will need to go to war to protect freedom. So this is me saying that that FDR says in the paragraphs leading up to this paragraph, he says that the U.S. will protect its national defense, that it will protect democracies elsewhere, and that it will protect what's morally right. And so those are high ideals that are not military objectives. But then immediately he says, therefore, the immediate need is a swift and driving increase in our armament production. So we need more arms in order to protect these ideals. And so my claim here then is that shows that FDR is willing to go to war and that he believes that the U.S. will go to war to protect its freedom. Okay, so this is one TIQA cycle. We got a TIQA. Now, when we do a TIQATIQA, the T changes its definition a little. So instead, we're not going to put another topic sentence. We already have our topic sentence for this paragraph. FDR indicates belief that military power should be used in defense of prosperity. What we do need, though, before we move on to another piece of evidence, is a transition. So we're going to transition from this first quote to the next quote with our next sentence. So this is our next T sentence, our transition sentence. And I'm going to say that, of course, so I'm going to say, of course, at the time of the speech, Roosevelt places most of the military onus of protecting democracy on democracies abroad. And I'm trying to get to this quote. So I've got, in paragraph 38, Roosevelt says, let us say to the democracies. And then he says, we Americans are vitally concerned in your defense of freedom. We are putting forth our energies, our resources, and our organizing powers to give you the strength to regain and maintain a free world. I'm going to leave that part out. But the part that matters to me is we shall send you in ever-increasing numbers ships, planes, tanks, guns. Okay. And so now I need to intro that quote. So my intro to that quote is what? So what I've said is Roosevelt is placing most of the military onus on protecting democracies, protecting democracy on democracies abroad. So now I'll say to them, the democracies abroad, right? Roosevelt promises, and then I'm going to put my quote. So with that intro, I don't need the let us say to the democracies. I've already sort of paraphrased that, right? He's saying this to them. And so what he says to them is, we shall send you, and I'm going to leave out this piece too. I don't need it either. So when we leave out a piece of a quote, we put our ellipsis in like that and put it in brackets to show that ellipsis, because the problem is with it just ellipsis in a quote, the ellipsis could have been in the original quote. It is up here in our paragraph 37 actually, because we're reading an excerpt, and so that ellipsis actually exists in the original text. So in this piece, the ellipsis does not exist in the text, so we put it in those brackets to show that we added it. Okay, and we only need one quotation mark here, and we don't want that period because we're going to put the period at the end here. We don't need Roosevelt because we've got his name in the in the sentence, and this was paragraph 38. Okay, and so now we move on to our analysis of this quote. So how does this now connect to what I've just said and to the idea that military power should be used in defense of prosperity? And so I'm going to say, for now, Roosevelt is content to send the products of this program of increased arms. I don't want to use production again when I've just said products. Increased arms manufacturing. To other them do the actual fighting. Okay, so that then is my analysis of that quote. And so now where do I want to go? So if I wanted to do, if I'm going to ask you, when I ask you to do this, I'm going to ask you to do maybe three rotations. So we need one more rotation to wrap up our paragraph. And what if I'm trying to say, FDR indicates the belief that military power should be used in defense of prosperity, but he does that by talking about armament production. But for now, he's willing to let the other democracies bear the weight of the war. Where might I go? Where could I end with my paragraph? And so I can think of two ways, right? I could say, despite this focus on military power, the majority of Roosevelt's speech actually focuses on America's moral power. And I could use a quote like from right here at the end, where he talks about in paragraph 65, since the beginning of our American history, we have been engaged in change, a perpetual peaceful revolution that goes on steadily, quietly adjusting itself to changing conditions. And I could say that despite this allusion to military power, in the end, FDR actually believes that that our real power lies in our moral compass and our flexibility in the face of change, right? That could be where I go with that quote. I could also add another piece that comes back to my idea that eventually America is going to enter the war with, I could go with a quote from paragraph 43. We must all prepare to make the sacrifices that emergency, almost as serious as war itself, demands. And I could say that Roosevelt nonetheless expects Americans to prepare as if preparing for war, and then have that quote, and then say that while the president of the nation would obviously want to keep people calm and lead them in a time of danger with less anxiety, these quotes help us to see that FDR sees war coming as the inevitable end. That FDR is not blind to the fact that the U.S. will eventually end up in this war, something like that, right? So that's two possible ways I could end this paragraph with a third TIQA rotation. All right, so that is the TIQA format.